When's the last time you've published an Instagram picture? Maybe last week. You took 2 minutes out of your day to retouch and find the perfect caption emoji. How long do you think it takes to publish an article? Whatever number you said, I bet you underestimated the time. Publication is a rigorous and long process that involves a team of experts. Why all the fuss? To establish trust in science. Trust starts with truth and ends with truth. But as of lately, science has been scrutinized by the public. In reality, researchers are always under a microscope. Watched. Let's talk trust in science with our guest, Dr. Trisha Mahtani. Now, trust lies on 4 foundations: consistency, compassion, communication, and competency. But I'd like to add one more: transparency. Scientific articles take up to 1 year to get published, and the steps are as follows. Once the researchers have completed their experiments and collecting and analyzing data, they essentially condense all their work into a science paper. Secondly, the researchers need to find a publisher. Journals are the publishers of the research world. Like any project, the researchers need to pitch their article to journal companies. Finally, once a journal signs to publish their article, the editor is informed to start the peer review process. There are 3 main players in the peer review process: reviewers, the researcher submitting the paper, and most importantly, the editor. For each paper, there are 2 to 3 voluntary reviewers who work to read the article and make comments on the researcher's conclusions and data. The editor is responsible for selecting 2 to 3 reviewers best fit for the paper. They're also responsible for screening the paper for any immediate threats to validity, like conflicts of interest. And finally, the editors, on the behalf of the journal company, are receiving papers from different researchers and determining which papers will be published in their journal versus the papers that will be rejected. In addition, the editors can almost act like a filter.
So that's helpful, where the editor is usually like, okay, they suggested this, but that takes longer than a year, so don't worry about doing that. Or they suggested that, but that could make a whole other paper, so don't worry about that. Or maybe they see something where they're like, actually, yeah, we agree with this reviewer. You need to get this done for us to accept this paper. So they will usually break it down for you,
filtering out some of the reviewers' comments. All in all, the entire publication process can include up to 10 people. How are reviewers selected?
So, for example, if you publish something on immune responses to COVID-19, they would typically send out the paper to review with immunologists, people who know the immune system, or virologists, people who know COVID-19 really well. They would try to find a group of reviewers, evaluate the different aspects of the topic with having knowledge base already in that topic. So they wouldn't pick any virologist, they'd pick a virologist who's potentially published on COVID-19 already or is doing a research project on COVID-19 versus someone who might be working on chickenpox, for example.
And this got me thinking. Science is competitive. As much as it's not acknowledged, articles and data hold the quote-unquote business secrets of a lab. For example, there are 2 labs racing to publish a novel cure for cancer X. Won't there be a conflict of interest if Lab A becomes a reviewer for Lab B's article? Lab A can steal ideas or make revisions harder to lengthen the time it takes for Lab B to publish, in hopes to slowing down their competing lab. The publication process acknowledges many of the possible problems and has made slight changes.
So you're able to declare people that you would prefer to review it versus people that you would prefer not to review it. So if there's a project that's very similar to what someone else is doing, then you can ask they don't review it because you don't want them seeing that data beforehand or nitpicking about things that you know they're going to be tougher about because they know that area really well.
Aside from the academic and credentials of reviewers, anonymity is an important aspect of revision. The reviewers do not know who wrote the paper. Of course, anonymity can be a double-edged sword, and this is where accountability comes in place.
So when they say, oh, we're going to publish the reviews, or oh, we're going to publish the reviews with your name attached to it, then people are more careful about how they construct their actual reviews. So there are things coming in place to try and mitigate these different conflicts, but not every journal has added them in yet.
Now let's take a closer look to the publication timeline.
Typically what happens is you'll submit to the journal. They'll give you a response typically within a week on whether they're sending it out to reviewers or not. Then if they send it out to reviewers, you can expect to hear back from reviewers about a month after they send it out, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later. It depends on everyone's schedule. And then based on what the reviewers recommend, they may ask for certain revisions to the paper, so things that you may have to add or clarify. And depending on how expansive these revisions are, they typically give up to a year to perform the revisions.
And after everything's been approved, you can finally publish your paper. 1 year of revisions sounds like a really long time, but there has been a recent change to the traditional path of publications. Presenting preprints. Prior to completing your paper's revisions, you can publish your paper in a form of a preprint that will be accessible to the public. Journals like bioRxiv and bioRxiv will publish preprints that are marked with a large disclosing statement, stating that the article has not been peer-reviewed and should not be interpreted as conclusive. Although the timeline seems simple and straight, in reality it's a bumpy path with many of its challenges. There are 2 phases of challenges. One being the financial and resource bump, which includes getting the funding for the research, and bump 2 being finding a journal that wants to publish your article. And this is measured by a system.
So there's a vast variety of journals, and they all have this metric called an impact factor. So based on the number of citations of the papers they have published in the past year divided by the amount of publications they had that year gives them an impact factor. So the more citations per paper, the higher their impact factor. So a lot of people will like to send their paper first to a higher impact factor journal, and then they may hear back and say, we don't think this meets the scope of our journal, try something else.
The impact factor is one of the many criteria that researchers look at when they're picking their journal company. Other factors can be the specialized topic that the journal has, and they also look at the journal's policies, whether the journal publishes the reviewer's comments or whether the journal allows for free access to the public. High levels of rejection and criticism is just another day for a researcher trying to publish an article. Revisions take the longest time to complete. Revisions can be as simple as typos to as big as missing data pieces, scaling of graphs, missing control groups, clarification of conclusions, and re-experimentation. Main takeaway is, to meet the reviewer's requests, it requires more manpower, which ultimately costs more money. Where does this money come from? To answer that question, sorry for the cliffhanger. Check out part 2 of Trusting Science. We hope you learned a lot about the rigorous publication process and gained a sense of appreciation for research. That's all for today. Thank you, Dr. Trisha Mahtani, for being a part of this learning journey. And as always, keep translating science.